Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Just a quick question to start, actually. If you had to put a number on it, how much do you think inefficient HR processes are costing your business each year? Would just like for you to have a number in your head for a second, because most people actually guess way too low. Um, the research that we're going to be sharing today puts it to up to around £450,000 for a 250 person business. And what's really interesting is it's not an obvious number. It's not just one big cost. It's actually small incremental things building up in the background. I'm Dylan Perek, and look, I spend most of my time speaking with HR leaders in the growing UK business, with leaders in growing UK businesses. Typically, business is with up to around 500 employees. I've been helping show businesses the impact that software and technology can offer them for the last 4 years. And honestly, whether you're an enterprise or an SMB, typically the same themes are coming up again and again: too much admin, multiple systems, siloed teams, lack of visibility. And most commonly now, what I'm starting to really realize is there's a lot of uncertainty around AI. So what we're going to cover today is based on real conversations and research that we've conducted, that's actually happening across the market right now. And I am joined by Verity. Verity, I'll let you introduce yourself quickly.
Super, thanks, Dylan. Morning, everyone. I am Verity O'Brien. I'm one of the global employee success business partners here at the Access Group. So I support the colleagues internally within the people division, of which we have approximately about 1,000 spread across different geographies, from Europe across to Asia Pacific. And I am going to talk to you a lot about what's happening, obviously, in the AI and HR fields, but actually more importantly, what you can go away and what you can do off the back of this webinar. I think it's really important to try and cut through some of the noise, some of the hype, and actually give you as practitioners some really helpful practical examples of what you can do. I've been at the Access Group now 5 years, and actually it's really exciting being in the HR profession at this moment in time and seeing what the future holds for us and what we can deliver for our businesses. So I'll hand back to you, Dylan, for the first part of this webinar.
Amazing. Thank you, Verity. So, yeah, look, you'll get both the commercial aspects from myself and then more of a reality inside our organization and the people perspective, which is where this really all matters and kind of pieces together. So, just want to set expectations quickly in terms of today's agenda. I'm going to start by walking through the gap. So, what and where most HR teams are actually today in companies we speak with, and what that impact is from a cost perspective. So we'll really run through the quantifying the impact and the return on investment, and then Verity will take you through what the employees really think about AI and the people perspective. And then we'll make it a little bit more practical. So what you can actually do next without kind of big budgets or complex projects to move forwards. As of course, we understand that there is a lot of noise around AI right now. So really the goal today is to cut through that and keep it grounded, and then we'll leave some time, for you to ask questions throughout the course of the webinar, and we will follow up with any questions at the end or after the session as we go through. Okay, so just quickly on where this all kind of comes from and why we put this webinar together. So everything today is based on, two independent YouGov studies commissioned by Access, which were independently verified. We actually received over 1,600 responses across employees and HR leaders across a multitude of industries and business sizes. So what we really bring to you today is it's not just one segment or one perspective of, what the industry is talking about, but really more, hopefully, really balanced picture of what leadership is thinking and what employees are actually experiencing, right? So, of course, that's really important because those two don't always line up. So we'll see that all later in the webinar as well. Okay, so before we get into AI, we actually need to really start by addressing something really more fundamental and where organizations are actually currently today that we're speaking with, right? Because there's a technology gap. There's a clear technology gap within the industry, and most businesses aren't actually starting with an AI challenge. They're actually starting with a foundational challenge. Nearly half of businesses are spending the majority of their time still with using spreadsheets to manage their workforce planning and HR processes. Everything from holiday calculations, document management, things like monitoring and governing compliance from work permits, recruitment, etc. Which is really leading to limited visibility for HR leaders, a lots and lots of manual effort, and no real predictive insight or real time reporting for them to make business decisions with well in advance of the moments they need to make those decisions. And so when we're really looking at this workload, a typical HR team is roughly, based on some of those tasks I've mentioned and more, spending around 36 hours a week on admin. And that's a two-person team, supporting around 250 people. Now that's, if we look at it, an entire person's week just to kind of keep things running, right? And that kind of goes alongside, the other statistic on the far right-hand side of this slide, which is, alluding to the fact that 78% of businesses are only discovering retention issues when someone resigns. So at this point, businesses are starting to just become reactive. They're not proactive, they're not managing. And when we look at that kind of cost impact across the year or even monthly, those missed signals, delayed decisions, just firefighting things day to day, that's where that £450,000 cost is coming from, right? It's small incremental, administrative burden tasks that really aren't quite obvious until you sit there and quantify them, but are really quite constant for businesses. And, whilst I do speak with businesses day to day, I hear it all the time. HR leaders are fully aware of kind of what they should be doing, spending time on more strategic work, but they've actually not got the time to do it. And this is where AI is really starting to widen the gap and really start to change things for businesses, right? What we're starting to really see is that it's not creating the gap. The gap kind of already exists because of technology and companies having that kind of fundamental digital infrastructure in place. AI is just essentially accelerating that gap that already exists by, separating two different cohorts of organizations. Group A, organizations that are already set up digitally, who are now just essentially layering on an AI kind of layout within the business across their tech, which is just leading to faster decisions, earlier insights, and just more time back for their business. So we talked a little bit earlier about spending 36 hours per week, on admin burden. With AI being layered on top of digital systems, we're actually looking at getting that back. So we're looking at about 25 to 35 hours of capacity gain from research every week. So if we look at that group of companies versus the companies that are currently operating manually and don't have a system in place, that are still currently stuck in admin heavy processes, they can't even start to use AI yet because they've not got that platform in place to start working from. So that's why this whole topic matters, right? Because the gap isn't static. It is growing every month, and it's AI that's really driving that on top of an existing digital infrastructure. So there's obviously clear benefits, right? There's numbers that are essentially, showcasing how this is going to be how this is being brought to reality and what is actually changing. And it's important that we really kind of highlight that this isn't a hype, right? It's real data, it's backed, it's verified. And what we're seeing is that 88% of users are seeing tangible benefits. Now, statistically, that's a great number, right? It's a big number. And half of HR leaders are saving time on admin as well. So about a third are gaining time for strategic work, which is, as we discussed earlier, is what HR teams want the most of. So that's a really great number to kind of address when it comes to benefits. But also when we look at retention and we look at routine queries, things along those lines, holidays, policies, pay slips that are constant flows, that are repetitive tasks, we're looking at 60 to 80% reduction on those, but then also a big shift when it comes to retention as well, and being able to spot issues earlier. And we all are fully aware that the cost of hiring staff is quite significant. So in being able to rather spend that cost on hiring and attracting staff, it's more making businesses proactive, focusing more on that retention, and allowing them to identify some of those changes well in advance, where that impact will really start to compound for an organization. Now, there's obviously numbers attributed to the return on investment to this as well, which really is starting to showcase and emphasize on the tangible benefits that we've just been through. Roughly, an investment on technology of around £28,000 is returning up to about £180,000 annually, which isn't even coming from anything complex, if I'm honest. So it's just things like reducing repetitive tasks. It might be pro rata calculations of annual leave, or perhaps sending out documents, checking work permits, that kind of stuff, up into making retention decisions a little bit better, faster real-time reporting, not having to kind of collate data and go into different areas to find reports, whereas just being able to quickly prompt and find answers, and spending more time on high-value work. Okay, so where we look at a company that's currently spending hours or even days on solving a simple question about their workforce, maybe policy related, for example, AI can just quickly turn that into minutes. And then when you've got that speed, right, and you've got AI there to quickly drive quickly compliant decisions in the moment for employees, managers, and then compound that across the organization, it starts to make decision-making processes a lot quicker across the board. So ROI isn't just looking at it financially. It is more about looking at it operationally and where you can save time across those different areas and across the different segments across your business as well. So yeah, there's a clear quantifiable impact, and a clear benefit into solutions. But there is an organizational challenge right now which needs to be addressed, because even with a strong business case, what we're finding is, the adoption isn't quite following through. People are really quite unsure. I do personally remember when I first heard of AI, I was also personally quite, a little bit apprehensive about it. But, we look at employees now, within a business, around 41% of them are still concerned about AI, which is statistically almost 50%, right? So a lot of businesses, I would say, are underestimating that, as because they've got a great commercial kind of ROI case. It doesn't really make a strong impact for the business when there's an unclear or uncomfortable internal feeling between employees, and that's where things are really starting to slow down. So look, Verity, I'll hand over to yourself just to kind of discuss what the people are experiencing. I think you're on mute, Verity, just at the bottom.
Oh, there we go. Am I unmuted?
You are, yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
I need an AI agent to unmute my microphone every time I forget to unmute myself. I mean, I don't know how long we've been working now with MS Teams, but or different, it gets me every time. But anyway, that shows my abilities laid bare there. So super. Thank you, Dylan. Really, really interesting start of this webinar. And I think what I want to build on is how the teams within your businesses, what actually they might really think about AI, if you believe there is some different sentiment within your organizations, and then actually how we can use the data that we collated through the survey into some practical insights, which I think would be very useful for everybody on this call. So perfect, the perception gap. So this slide, it's got lots of big numbers on. And what I want to really get across or explain is how it differs in the organizations that you work in and what you might see. So the gap that plays out in your team meetings or in your town halls or in one-to-ones, whether you see it or not, what our research has told us is that 41% of employees are concerned about the impact AI is having or could have on their jobs. And actually amongst HR leaders, that's only 25%. So, a 16-point gap, as we've said on the slide. And reflecting on this data when I read it for myself, it completely makes sense. Of course it does, because as HR leaders, as senior leaders within organizations, we have the visibility into how this will actually be rolled out. Where are we going to deploy AI? Where are we going to implement it into our processes? What are we going to change as a result of the technology that's coming through? And it's not a given that our people, our teams, have that insight and awareness. So that difference can actually then create a bit of a trust deficit, which is something that businesses need to be aware of. And then 1 in 5 employees off the back of that named job replacement as their single biggest fear. So if we lead from our own comfort level as in HR practitioners or senior leaders, rather than theirs, we lose them quite early on in that AI adoption journey, because we're both looking at the same set of information, but we've got two completely different biases, for want of a better word, about how that might impact us. So that's just something important to note. If you have the ability to have engagement surveys or track sentiment around AI, or even things such as small focus groups, I really would recommend getting a good understanding of how AI is perceived within your workforce, and actually where we need to focus. And I'll come on to a bit more about that shortly. So what employees actually need from HR, and it's not training. Well, I'm not, whether or not we feel a sigh of relief for that or not, I'm not sure. We'll see how we get on. But this one often can surprise people. So when we ask about what would build employee confidence around AI, the top answer, as we've seen in this data, is actually knowing whether their job is protected. And that's by nearly 3-to-1 over the concept of training somebody how to use AI or where they might deploy AI. So, and that surprises a lot of people, because sometimes we take for granted that if we train somebody on how to do something, they get it and they roll with it and everything's fine. But there are a lot of deep-rooted concerns, and the press doesn't help fuel this narrative of what could happen to me in the workforce, even by the end of the next few years. So alongside that, people really want to then know when AI is monitoring them. A human reviewing significant decisions, we take that for granted, but that should be something that's built into our ethos moving forward in this world. Is there a human in the loop? We shouldn't relinquish all of our decisions in HR to AI. We should keep that as that human-centric touch. And actually the right to challenge a decision within an employee, within an organization, about what's happening with AI. I don't know if anybody saw in the press, but on the point around right to know when AI is monitoring them, that was actually set off quite a significant snowball of articles in Meta, who announced that they were tapping into keystrokes using AI for all of their global workforce. So they were able to tell and collect data on working patterns, what people were doing, using AI that was monitoring their keyboard strokes. And ultimately that set off quite a big debate about how we should use AI. Is that ethical? What should companies be able to do? So if you haven't seen that article, it is definitely worth a read. And the practical takeaway, I think, from this slide for me is lead with job security where you can first, transparency, and then build on capability. I'm not advocating that anybody on this call or anyone that's in an SME makes things up if they don't know the answer. But actually, if we have a transparent AI program, if we know where we're going to deploy the products, then we should be talking to our members of staff about that. We should be upskilling our workforce. We should be trying where we can to give them that, feeling that their job is secure and that they will actually be enabled or enhanced or, augmented in some cases by AI. But actually their role within the organization is really important. Only do that, like I say, if you can stand by that credibly, because what you don't want to do is say something that then gets challenged later down the line or seen as not being fair or, honest about your intentions, and that can create, again, unwanted consequences. But if we go back to the training, which is a fundamental element of how we here at Access as well operate our use of AI tools, definitely go and address any fears that you might have. Otherwise, the training mechanisms that could land on deaf ears, and that's not really a good use of anybody's time, particularly in the businesses that you all run, where time is precious and you want to make sure that you're maximizing every opportunity. Okay, super duper. So on this slide here, there is the normalization effect. And what that means is it's a term, as I'm sure you can probably gather, for when things become common to us or obvious, or they happen all of the time, we have less concerns about whether or not that will do something of an adverse effect. And actually we can, start to see how they form part of our daily lives. If we were to think, 20 years ago, when everybody got given an iPhone, people were probably like, what on earth is this? What does it do? I've got no, use for this. Fast forward that, and obviously now they are ingrained within our culture. So there's good news here, and there's also a warning in some respects. So the good news is that fear of job replacements is falling. So from 47% to 41%. And that is often because familiarity of usage of tools, of awareness, can then reduce the fear. It becomes not unknown, excuse me. And people, within our organizations, Access included, they're using these tools daily, and they're getting very comfortable with what the LLMs can do, what the agents can do, and how we can automate workflows. But two concerns are rising. And this is where, particularly as HR practitioners, we need to be ensured that we're on our game. So data security worries, they are on the up, and they are often unresolved. So individuals, companies, customers, everybody, we all want to know that the data is secure, and that we have approved tools within the workforce's AI, not AI, I'm trying to think of the word, it'll come to me in a minute, within our own sort of system, our safe system that we operate in. And then the biggest concern shift is about reliability and accuracy. So that's jumped from 35% to 54%. And I'm sure we've all had opportunities or examples where we might be using the likes of Claude or Copilot or ChatGPT, and you might ask it a really simple question and it gets confused, for example, on UK bank holidays. So it's that type of thing where you go, I'm not sure how this is going to play out. What do I do? How do I mitigate this? So the workforces are much savvier than even this time a year ago. They have been able to spot where AI gets things wrong, and they can actually then see a bit through the vendor hype, a bit through sort of the aspirations to have, valuations worth trillions and billions of pounds. And then the conversation has to be around honest limitations within your workforce of what you're deploying this tool to do, how much does it cost, and are you going to get the return on investment that you need? And data here echoes a lot that is currently being talked about in the press also. Next slide, please, I think. Super. Okay, so Shadow IT, I believe is this one, if I can get my notes correct. Hang on a minute. Right. It was all going so well until I lost my speaker notes. Right, apologies everybody, I'm back. So Shadow IT, so what's really happening, and HR owns the response. So for anybody that's not heard the term of Shadow IT, what we capture under this terminology is that or AI tools, systems, LLMs, chatbots that are being used by employees on a regular basis that nobody knows about. And the company hasn't sanctioned Claude license, for example, but 20 members of the sales team have gone and got personal Claude licenses, and they're putting all sorts of data, customer data, recordings, sales calls, everything into that system in their own personal licenses. So that is an example of shadow IT or shadow AI coming into the workforce. So 44% of employees are already using AI at work, and 16% are using personal tools like ChatGPT with company data. Not ideal. So outside any governance at all, and not just employees, but also actually we count ourselves, a quarter of HR leaders are doing the same. The question isn't whether to allow AI into, the internal firewall. That's the word I was looking for earlier, Dylan. It's now come to me. It's already here. The barn door's been opened and the horse is gone. It's about what do we do now? So my recommendation on that is a bit of an amnesty approach. So show us, how are you using AI? Where is it already being deployed? There's no judgment, there's no repercussions. We just want to learn, we just want to understand. You can run an anonymous survey if you have that capability and see which tools meet the security bar, and then fast track approval for the ones that actually do pass and add value within your organization. What we don't recommend is driving the usage underground and then losing all visibility to what's happening until, a database has been deleted, or there's been a data leak, or there's been something, really brand damaging occur for your customer base or your employees. We don't want that. We want to encourage an open conversation with this type of tooling. Super. Okay, so what actually to do next? And I did enjoy when I read this title of this slide, because my 6-year-old daughter finishes every sentence in a minute with actually. So actually, what to do next? And we'll get into that now. Super. So the top AI use cases for HR teams right now. So you could be sitting there within your organization thinking, Verity, I've got this nailed. I don't need to listen to you anymore. I'm going to go and have a cup of tea. Please don't do that. But actually, there are lots of different organizations on a very different maturity scale of AI use cases for HR teams. We at Access like to think that actually we are quite ahead of that maturity curve in some of the things that we're doing, certainly things that I'm advocating for in my role. But then we talk to lots of, we see different colleagues in the profession and the things that they're doing within their companies, and it's quite a stark difference. So what I wanted to do is try and put some ideas on a slide. So these are the 5 areas delivering value for HR teams right now. And none of them, in our belief, need a big budget. You can email me later, I suppose, if you do find that they do. But so recruiting, let's take that one. Number 1, drafting job descriptions, screening support, interview questions. All of that can be quite easily modified or automated into a workflow using AI. Onboarding checklist, policy Q&As, first week, content, somebody tell me, where is the employee handbook? Where do I go and find this? The onboarding checklist, all of the processes that we put into place within HR that can free us up to do the value add work. Onboarding has got so many quick wins, I think, from my own personal experience, but also looking into the wider market. Day-to-day admin, so taking holiday, payroll queries, all of that type of thing that can clog up inboxes really quickly. That a lot can be, you can set agents running, you can build Claude or Copilot responses to answer those queries. There's lots of things that you can do with relative ease to help that. Performance and L&D, so that could be things like drafting appraisal summaries, spotting development gaps. It's excellent at analysing lots and lots of data. So if you want to actually do a thematic analysis on some of your performance data or L&D data, AI can be a fantastic tool. And then reporting and insights. So slightly building on what I was just saying, turning raw data into plain English, board ready updates in minutes is truly a real power of the AI. And, my advice is, don't try and pick all 5 at once and go back and go, oh my God, I'm going to do all of these things. Pick 1 or 2 that really eats into most of your time in your working day, and start there. And actually you should then start to see the gains of those results, sort of, your ability to increase your capacity can increase exponentially off the back of some of those things. Right, I'm going to take a quick drink of my tea before I go on to this one. So HR and IT, and I always enjoy talking about this slide because Wes, who is the sort of CTO, for want of a better description, within Access, who I work with, he's like my new bestie. So him and I are talking regularly, and I mean like daily regularly, about all of the fantastic things that we can do together to not only improve the experiences of employees within Access, but then giving the tools and the power and the infrastructure to fundamentally rewrite some of the things that might be all driving us mad for years and years and years, and we think, why do we do it this way? Let's just do it a different way. So Shadow IT, as we've probably established, it is happening, and I don't think the answer is restriction. It's about collaboration, and in smaller business, that often means that us as HR teams we lead that. I certainly have spent time in my career in SMEs, and certainly my to-do list spanned many different sectors of the business, and I think this definitely probably is falling with us. But actually that's great, because we are the team that is all about, human resources, human capability, enablement. It absolutely should sit within the HR teams, because we have the real knowledge about how we get the humans within our workforce to work with the AI for actually really, truly transforming what we do and how we can deliver for our customers. So the three things before you sort of adopt any tool or think about what you might want to do. Definitely, who can see our data? Where is it stored? And does it train? So do the models train on our inputs? And that's not often a question that HR professionals might think to ask, but I can give you an example. So, for example, an AI automated tool called Whisper Flow is where you can speak into the app, and it transcribes and it gives your commands into the AI. But that actually uses what you're saying into that app or the universe to train its models. So just be really mindful about when you're using these LLMs or these new technologies that are happening or coming out of the woodwork every day. Where's that data going? Is it training on the outputs? And ask some curious questions. Building a simple use policy covering what's approved and why, what data can and can't go in, and what happens when something goes wrong. So you want to create a fast, clear approval route and bring the IT department in early, so not at the end. It's about the co-creation, as I talked about earlier. We also mustn't ever forget the GDPR basics in the GDPR land of the gods. And actually, is data leaving the organisation, and do we have a lawful basis, and are employees informed? So it might seem technical, it might seem daunting to think about those things, but actually once you have them in place and once you have the infrastructure written down, it's actually really easy to move to the different things that you might want to do with AI in your organizations. Cool. Right. And then I think, hopefully, right, the three things to take away from today, aside from the fact that Verity cannot use her microphone properly. But so I think, Dylan, the first one is for you. Is that right? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, of course. The cost of standing still is real and quantifiable. Look, I think what really resonated with me there, Verity, when you was talking about some of the use cases of AI was, I'm speaking with customers every day about the real impact of using spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Just very basic things like onboarding, self-service, that kind of stuff. Is really starting to add real value, bringing in technology to automate those and add like I say, incremental time back to someone in HR. So it doesn't have to be AI straight away, but at least kind of taking that initial step to kind of digitizing some of those manual processes will reap rewards as well. So I think the second one's yours, is it?
It sure is. Right. Okay. So your people are already using AI. The question is whether you're leading it. So I think this comes again back to the concept of, 44% of employees are already using AI. They are sort of going, well, I'm going to start doing it now. I haven't been given permission. I'll seek apologies if things go wrong. So actually what we need to do as HR leaders is get ahead of this, earn the trust of the organization, earn the trust at that sort of senior level, board level discussion, and that actually this is something that we should be looking at, we should be moving towards, or we should be building on, because ultimately if we don't say anything, then we're leaving ourselves exposed to a risk that we can't quantify, and nobody wants to be that test case or that use case for that business who didn't think to sort of put procedures or policies into place. And actually, it's not really about procedures and policies. I'm not a massive fan of procedures and policies. what I'm a fan of is enablement and of transparency and of leaders and businesses really taking on board the journey that they're going on and actually thinking, how can we embrace this? How can we walk towards it, not walk away? John Jorgensen here at the Access Group as co-CEO, he talks about the growth mindset. And this is an absolute prime example of where the growth mindset really comes into play. That, start small, ask the questions, and you never know actually where it might lead you. And then, are you on the final one?
Yeah, just to echo what you said there, right? It doesn't
Oh,
have to
it's
be a huge.
seamless, that, Dylan.
Yeah,
It's
it
like
is.
you
Yeah.
practice this.
Yeah, of course. Look, it's not about taking huge steps. It's take small incremental steps. Build from there. It doesn't have to be really complex. And hopefully it will address and make things a little bit easier. Let's not get overwhelmed and take too much on at one go. And I think just the final slide, just kind of close up and finish off for today. Just a huge thank you to everyone for joining today. Obviously, questions in the chat will follow up after this. We will also share the reports and recording after this as well if
Yep.
you'd like to carry the conversation on. So happy to chat. No pressure, of course, but thanks again for your time. Appreciate you joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dylan.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.